Hello friends, this is Yuru, and on today's episode of Blizzard Hates Warriors, we will be going over everything that you need to know about your Fury Warrior in Mythic Plus Dungeons. Mythic Plus Dungeons, especially high-level ones, make up the highest level of competitive PvE content that World of Warcraft has to offer, aside from Mythic raiding. Fury Warriors are currently very strong in Mythic Plus, bringing strong burst, sustained cleave, and respectable single-target damage. They falter in terms of defensive and group utility in the highest of keys, but can reliably complete plus 15 dungeons without issue, and push even higher with the right group setup. Because the majority of Mythic Plus revolves around dealing damage with multiple targets, Fury follows the basic multi-target priority that you would in a raid. The key difference is in predicting the layout of the dungeon and knowing when to save cooldowns versus when to use them. Smartly saving your cooldowns when a target is about to die and instead using it on a fresh pack which will survive the duration of your burst damage is far more efficient and will help your group finish on time. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing that we are going to be talking about here is your stat priority, or your stat weights. In simple terms, this is the order that you would usually use to select similar pieces of gear of the same item level. In most cases, item level trumps all, but when you have several pieces of the same item level, you can use this list to see which one will be best for you. The stat priority for Fury Warrior is as follows. First and foremost will always be Strength. As far as your secondary stats go, Haste and Mastery lead the pack, with Critical Strike and Versatility falling slightly behind. These sample stat weights represent the general relationship of secondary stats compared to 1 point of strength, although as usual, individual results may vary. It is highly recommended that you regularly sim your own gear upgrades or generate personalized stat weights. Now, Strength is your primary stat found on plate armor, weapons, and trinkets. It provides attack power, which contributes to the damage of all abilities and auto attacks. Haste compresses the rotation, reducing the global cooldown, the time between auto attack swings, and the cooldown of the rotational abilities Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, and Execute, as well as the speed at which Bladestorm and Rampage deal damage. Mastery increases the damage bonus provided by your Mastery, which is Unshackled Fury, boosting all damage dealt while enraged. Versatility provides a flat increase to damage dealt and reduces damage taken by half as much. Now, your critical strikes deal double damage, although Fury does not generate extra rage on critical strike the way Arms does. This leaves the value of critical strike rather low, as Fury lacks strong mechanics to emphasize it. Next up, we will go into talents. Now, Fury Warriors have some, but not a lot of talent choices in Mythic Plus, with the flexibility to bring extra mobility, utility, and tailor their damage to the expected situation. Due to the buff from Whirlwind, all of Fury's abilities will cleave up to 5 targets, making the spec very well suited to dealing sustained multi-target damage, especially effective with groups that pull small packs quickly rather than creating large groups to burst down all at once. At level 15, Fresh Meat is incredibly useful for reliably opening combat with and then maintaining Enrage, as it can be tab targeted to proc Enrage on each target. At level 25, Double Time is a staple for both mobility and rage generation, leading to more damage, although Stormbolt can be taken when stuns are needed to lock down difficult opponents. At level 30, Massacre is the main choice simply due to less competitive talents. Frenzy continuously falls off due to target changing frequently, and Onslaught can be decent, but difficult to work into an already cluttered rotation. Now for the level 35 talent, Warpaint is a moderate but very consistent amount of damage reduction. The high active time combined with Fury's own natural healing will help take pressure off your healer, especially in higher keys. For less dangerous situations though, Bounding Stride is the best alternative. At level 40, Cruelty is technically the strongest, although Raging Blow is not used nearly as much in AoE as single target. Frothing Berserker may be a little burstier, as the extra rage generation will help launch more Rampage casts. Level 45, Bladestorm is the go-to AOE talent now that Dragon Roar deals reduced damage to secondary targets. And at level 50, Anger Management helps Recklessness align with Bladestorm, significantly increasing burst AOE potential. Siegebreaker remains fairly strong in sustained cleave, but Mythic Plus dungeons typically favor better cooldown frequency. Next up, we can go over the typical AOE rotation for a warrior in Mythic Plus. I'm going to leave out the single target rotation, as mainly you're just going to be AOEing for most of the dungeon. You can find that on one of my other videos if you really want to look it up. But basically, to start out, you definitely want to open up with a charge to gain rage. Then you want a Bloodthirst. After Bloodthirst, you want a Whirlwind. That will activate your cleave. Once you Whirlwind, hit Recklessness, if it's available, and then your Covenant ability, whether that's Condemn, Spear of Bastion, or Ancient Aftershock. After that, you want a Rampage. You should have enough rage by now to Rampage. Rampage is going to enrage you for your Bladestorm. You only want a Bladestorm while enraged. Once the Bladestorm is done, rinse and repeat. Whirlwind to cleave, Bloodthirst, Rampage, Whirlwind, Bloodthirst, Rampage. If you have nothing to cast, you want to do your Raging Blow. Other than that, you cast your Condemn, your Execute, Spear of Bastion, whatever it is that you have, on cooldown to fill out the rest of the rotation. Now we're going to talk a little about the utility that a Fury Warrior can bring to a Mythic Plus dungeon group. We're going to start out with the obvious, that is the Battle Shout buff. It increases the attack power by 5%, which applies to all melee specs and warrior abilities, even those which do not deal purely physical damage. Only a warrior can bring this buff. The standard interrupt for a warrior is Pummel, which is crucial in Mythic Plus as interrupting dangerous spellcasts is of the utmost importance. One of the stronger defensive abilities in the game is Rallying Cry, which applies to the entire party, making it a strong defensive tool during periods of group-wide damage or a personal cooldown as needed. Then we have Spell Reflection, which is an exceptional Mythic Plus ability, either for reducing the damage of powerful debuffs or reflecting high damage and debilitating effects. Although the ability can be used quite often due to its low cooldown, properly identifying which abilities should be reflected is key, as it can completely nullify and negate dangerous effects and render some enemies completely harmless. Now for a couple of abilities that we went over earlier, Stormbolt is another useful tool in stopping enemy attacks and spellcasts, although it comes at the cost of double time, which is a very strong mobility option. Intimidating Shout can also be used as a fake kind of stun, but much less reliably, as it could fear mobs into other packs. And moving on to Legendaries, this will be a pretty quick section as there aren't many viable options other than just a few, and currently the best choice of Legendary for Mythic Plus dungeons is Signet of Tormented Kings, as the extra Bladestorm procs contribute a great deal of extra damage when facing multiple targets. Judgment of the Arbiter is also a good choice when paired with another player who is using the effect, but the chances of that are probably pretty low, so we would suggest going with Signet of Tormented Kings here. And now we'll talk about Covenants. Covenants are a major system in Shadowlands, requiring players to make a choice between 4 different factions to align with. As each grants a different special ability and customization options, choosing between them can be very difficult for players. Here, I'll outline a brief overview of each Covenant in Mythic Plus in order of how well they perform, though it is extremely important to understand that the difference between each amounts to a small difference in total performance, less than 10% under ideal conditions, so players can safely choose any of the 4 and still not only be successful, but competitive inside Mythic Plus. First up is Night Fae. Night Fae offers Ancient Aftershock, which is a strong multi-target attack which also knocks down enemies and generates rage over time. While it is the strongest Covenant inside of the AOE heavy Mythic Plus dungeons, it is also harder to use effectively than many of the other options. The AOE attack has a long cooldown and leaves behind a ground effect which enemies must remain in to take damage and generate rage. And while it does continually knock down enemy targets, it is still possible for them to escape the field and deprive you of those advantages. The signature ability, Soul Shape, is also only moderately useful due to the high amount of mobility warriors already have and the inability to attack while transformed. Then we have Kyrian. Kyrian grants Spear of Bastion, which is a ranged AOE attack that tethers enemies for a short time. While only very slightly weaker than Night Fae, the spear has an advantage in a lower cooldown and dealing immediate damage, rather than over the span of 12 seconds, making it much easier to use effectively and gain full value every time it is cast. This makes it a very competitive choice and actually narrows the already small gap between the two covenants. The signature ability, Phial of Serenity, is also the most useful secondary ability, as having an extra on-demand heal is always beneficial, with the added bonus of removing a wide variety of deadly and debilitating debuffs, such as the Necrotic affix in Mythic. Following that, we have Venthyr. Venthyr replaces Execute with Condemn, which deals more damage and is usable at the beginning of encounters as well as the end. While the strongest sustained single target choice, it falters in Mythic Plus due to infrequent sustained execute phases and lack of burst AoE. That said, the Covenant as a whole is still only a few % behind Night Fae and Kyrian in terms of total damage done, and it does contribute a good deal of priority damage to bosses and other important targets. The signature ability, Door of Shadows, is only moderately useful due to the cast time and high amount of instant mobility warriors already have, although Soulbinds can enhance it with other effects, such as disorienting nearby enemies. And last but not least is Necrolord. Necrolord teaches Conqueror's Banner, which is a group critical strike buff on a long cooldown. Because of its group buffing nature, it can be difficult to put a value on exactly how strong the ability will be, as not everyone values critical strike the same and will not always have cooldowns aligned with it. But it is generally considered the weakest Covenant abilities for a few reasons. First and foremost, it has a long duration and a long cooldown, which means proper placement is key, and missing a use severely diminishes its total effectiveness. A situation which is exacerbated by the immobile ground effect, requiring the group to remain within the area to gain full value. When factoring the group buff, the Covenant is not actually far behind other choices, but the increased amount of effort required to make effective use out of the ability does not make it a very endearing choice. The signature ability, Fleshcraft, is surprisingly strong though, even more so due to the regular corpses available in dungeons to amplify it even further. Remember that no matter what your choice, there really is not a profound difference between Covenants, and they can all be successful in regular Mythic Plus dungeons. In terms of total damage output, you should not feel bad about taking one over the other. So that about wraps up this quick guide on Fury Warriors in Mythic Plus. Hopefully some of these tips helped you out in being a better, more efficient player. And I do have more guides out on my channel if you'd like to check those out as well. And if you could hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, all that other good stuff, I would greatly appreciate it. Leave any comments below. I do my best to reply to all comments, as you can probably see below my other videos. But other than that, thank you for watching this video and have a great night.